Welcome, everyone, to the Tuesday edition of the RotoWire NFL podcast, of course, brought to you by our buddies over at Circa Sports. We have waivers, and I think it's a bit better. I mean, I'm not sure why I have an accent coming up, but
yeah, there are running backs this week.
That's right. I was going to say, we have some running back choices. They might not be great, but at least there are choices, which has been something we've been asking about now for a pure month at this point. We'll get to those. Again, 4 teams on bye. You're also preparing for what looks to be a really pivotal fantasy week 14 week as well out there too. I mean, we're at that stage of the fantasy season where you are a have or a have not. And if you are a have, you need to be looking ahead. So Jake and I are going to get you set with those options here right after the music. Again, welcome to the Tuesday, November 12th edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Joe Bartel. You can follow me at JB Fantasy Sports on Twitter. As always, Jake Letarski, you can follow him at RotoJake. We're going into our top 5 waiver wire pickups, and without further ado, I think we just kick things right off with our guy, right? I mean, that's this point. We had mentioned him at least a little bit at the beginning of the show as a waiver wire pickup, Audric Estime for the Broncos.
Yeah, Audric Estime has to be number one first and foremost. And it's funny, we were begging for a running back last week, right? But then we were like, but we also don't really want anyone to get injured, right? You can't root kid for it that way. Audric Estime went ahead and made it right to the top of our list without any injury. I mean, Coach Sean Payton seems to really believe in Audric Estime. He got 14 of Denver's 17 rushing attempts this week. It was a 45% snap share, which on paper doesn't jump off, but compared to 29% for Javonte Williams, 13% for Jaleel McLaughlin, it's it's still dominating. He seems to be the guy. And then Sean Payton said afterwards that he's encouraged by his performance and that he will continue to give him more reps. Now the upcoming schedule, they got versus Atlanta at Las Vegas versus Cleveland, and those are 10, 25, and 8 against opposing running backs in half-point PPR formats, respectively. So it doesn't jump off the page, and I'm sure there's a little bit of risk in guys like Javonte Williams or one of those other guys getting a hot hand. But as far as someone that goes from 3% rostered to somebody that should be pretty much on every team here, you want to go ahead and make your roster better and get Audric Estime as the number 1 overall pickup here. Number 2 for me.
Well, I want to interject real quick because Estime is number 1 for my list as well. 14 offensive snaps total in the previous 4 weeks combined. Javonte Williams isn't. He's a free agent at the end of this year. Likely doesn't get brought back. I mean, I think at this point it's pretty clear that the Broncos, or at least Sean Payton, want to move on. So this is an audition for Audric Estime to be your starter for the Broncos moving forward. And I think it's important, given he's a rookie, the draft capital invested in him. Even though the production wasn't great, the carries matter, the playing time matters, and I think the guys around him, whether it be McLaughlin or Williams, matter too. And then also, if you're doing, I don't know if you do this on ESPN or Yahoo, wherever places you're looking at, Jake, I always search by like most points scored to find my waiver wire guys. So that's why MVS, who's going to be on our list, will come up in a little bit as one of the top options. Estime didn't get a lot of fantasy points, so he might be buried, and he's played throughout the season, so it's not one of those he's injured. You might have to actually scroll to find Estime. So from a budget perspective, from a budget perspective, knowing that all of us who are at waiver wire columns and shows are on Estime, but that he won't really be revealed in ESPN and Yahoo and different leagues quite easily. What percentage of budget are you putting on Estime?
I still think it's in the $22 to $28 range. In my running back desperate leagues, I will put a $28 bid, no problem in leagues that I don't really need a running back, but he's better than my last bench spot. I think I could go as low as 18% or $18, however you want to put this, 28% if you need him, 18% if he's just helping your bench and you don't plan on starting him. Because again, at this stage in the season, we're getting there where you want to block a move, right? You want to block other people from getting a potential fantasy guy. And like you said, he didn't light things up with his final stat line. You know what? I didn't even look it up because when I see 14 of 17 rushing attempts, you are RB1 and you matter for fantasy. So
I think he might get. I think you might be able to get him for a bit less. Like I was thinking like a 17% budget put on there. Like if I was aggressive doing so, but 22, 28, like that's. And you're right. At this
point, we got to see how many people even have $28 $5 left.
That's exactly
right out of 100. So you might be able to do. Yeah, you're right. From that perspective, you might be able to do it a little bit less here. But
or people are already checked
look
out.
At your league's budget. Look at your league's budget. See who is checked in. See who might be committing. Maybe go $1 more than your opponent who has left that might need them. That's another way to look at this, but yeah, he's definitely your priority ad this week. I'd say maybe there's only 2 to 3 priority ads, real big ones, right. And he comes at the top of the list.
Okay, that's good. That's what I wanted to, because after 2 through 5 on a waiver wire list aren't necessarily as impactful. And I think even in your 12-team leagues, Estime is pretty much a guaranteed pickup. In 10-team leagues, it's a little bit trickier. I see that on Reddit all the time. Everyone's like, oh, well, I got my 5 crazy studs in my 10-team league. Yeah, you're right. Don't pick up Estime. But in 12-team leagues and deeper, I think he definitely is somebody that needs to be a priority ad, like you mentioned. What's number 2 on your list?
I'm trying to think of where the line for adding Estime. Would you cut Bucky Irving for Estime? I don't know if I necessarily do that. Because that's the situation. I've gotten some of those leagues. So anyway, let's keep going. We can do scenarios and stuff later on. Throw your scenarios in the chat. We'll get to as many of those as we can. Number 2, Ricky Pearsall of the San Francisco 49ers, 37%. Rostered in Yahoo formats. Now, don't get me wrong. There are only 3 San Francisco 49er receivers that actually played, and Pearsall was last in terms of snap share, route run rate, and he was tied with Debo actually with 6 targets here, but he did have a very important touchdown play in that game. He's only going to get better and better here because obviously remember the guy got shot. He missed a good chunk of the start of the season here. Now he's back. I can see him as someone that continues to get better and better. We always thought he was good coming out of college, right? And of course, the Niners used the early draft on him, but it was always a question of opportunity. And obviously with Ayuk out, he has the opportunity now. And among all the receivers, even our cover boy, which we'll get to in a second here, Pearsall's number 2 for me. Speaking of Marquez Valdes-Scantling, I threw down at number 3 here. It's a case of last man standing for the Saints. Really, that's all it is. We're not quite sure what the status of Olave is or how long he's going to miss.
He's out at least 4 weeks, if not longer.
Did he actually go to IR today?
Yeah, he went on IR Saturday, and I think that would put him back in. He would be eligible to turn week 15. You've seen the Saints team. They're not very good. It would make a whole lot of sense if Olave is effectively out for the whole season. Correct.
And I mean, of course, Rashid Shaheed out for the year. Bub Means is also on IR. It really is a last man standing situation for the Saints. And really when it's all said and done, MVS only had 3 catches. And if you followed MVS's career, like the two of us have very close, you're going to expect some very frustrating pull your hair out drops if you're watching any of his games live and hoping for production. But nonetheless, a last man standing situation. Carr looks like he can still throw the deep ball to some degree. I mean, now that the film's out, the teams are going to maybe clue up on this, but Valdes-Scantling scoring twice in that offense that actually didn't look totally inept like we thought it would. I had seriously considered picking up the Falcons this stream instead of the Eagles this past week, and I'm glad I did not overthink that one. But yeah, Valdes-Scantling, last man standing, go for it. I threw Russell Wilson on there at number 4. I feel like there are 4 teams on bye this week. You look Kyler Murray. Nobody's using Bryce Young or Daniel Jones really, but Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield here. Russell Wilson, I think I put almost on the same plane as some of those guys. Now that he's got a new weapon in Mike Williams, he's looking good. And I don't think we'll talk about Jaylen Warren maybe a little bit later. I don't think Najee's banged up, but you got a pass catching running back there too. I think Russell Wilson's ceiling is pretty good, and there are definitely situations there.
And against the Ravens this week too. I mean, that's the other part of this. If you're looking at a streaming quarterback,
thank you for filling me in on that. I almost forgot. The most important one is the Ravens are about dead last in giving away points to quarterbacks and receivers, which has been great for the likes of Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry to have to continue to produce offensively into these games, but also the opponents. You definitely want to take a look at that. So, and then number 5, I could have definitely put him higher, but I threw Gus Edwards on here of the Chargers. In terms of snaps, wasn't used a ton, but he got 10 carries compared to 15 for J.K. Dobbins. Okay, this is a rushing team here, as we know. So Gus Edwards is a guy that got, while he was on IR, and there wasn't a lot of reporting about him, but while he was on IR, a lot of people probably cut him, and he is all the way down to 17% rostered. 10 carries a game is significant enough for him to make my list. Joe, I want to hear your list and how it might be different, because we might have had a tradition here because you have Edwards ranked a little higher than me.
Yep, Estime number 1, like we talked about. Again, the priority ad of this Week 11 waiver wire period, it needs to be the Broncos running back. Javonte Williams, an unrestricted free agent next year. I think Sean Payton's ready to move on. So that's the right call, especially as a rookie. I bumped Gus Edwards up to number 2, and this was in large part due to the lack of running back options we've had the past 3 weeks. Now, maybe I'm trying to centralize things on just diversifying what we discuss, but the Chargers, I think for the 5th time this season, had more rushing attempts than passing attempts. 39 runs to 18 passes against the Titans. That will not occur against the Bengals. So you're not picking up Gus Edwards to play him next week. Again, Chargers face the Bengals. I think the Chargers' passing attack will hopefully try to take advantage of that. But I thought Edwards looked pretty good. And more importantly, the guy that we liked a lot, Kamani Vidal, was a healthy and active. They kept Hassan Haskins as the third running back.
Mm-hmm.
He was
who naturally vultured a touchdown, right?
It was against his former team. I think that was Jim Harbaugh doing a solid for Haskins, who was drafted by the Titans. And vulture that from Dobbins, which certainly hurt me in a fantasy league that I have Dobbins starting. I think Dobbins has looked a little bit less efficient, a little less burst to it. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see a split what happened earlier this year where Edwards was the guy that was getting the more of the carries. Dobbins over the past 4 weeks has had to have so much of this workload. So I think there might be a flip of, well, let's get Edwards, who's got a bit more burst coming off of injuries, effectively have rest.
I mean, both of these guys have long injury history, right? So some kind of, if you're going to run the ball 30 plus times a game, there has to be some kind of a split there. No single running back of those two can or should be taking that kind of workload. So
Edwards is a running back 5 for your team, and depending on what your roster build is, there can be 10 league rosters out there that should have a running back 5 like Gus Edwards. If you're getting 10 carries like he is, and I think that's conservative for the rest of the season, he vaults up to number 2. Again, just given that we have not discussed many running backs. The other issue is there's effectively nobody else. Like, it's Estime or Gus Edwards, and then nobody from a running back perspective. So that's why
after that, we're definitely going to spec ads, and we've got a good list of them if you're in the deep leagues and you need some. So definitely stay tuned, as we get to that point of the show here. But there are 2 running backs ranked in our top 5s that are a tier above and beyond what you can find elsewhere.
Number 3 for my waiver wire pickup, and I avoided Ricky Pearsall because I'm trying to find some of the deeper league listings. You have him at nearly 40% on rostered on Yahoo. That's fine. I have Mike Williams, and he only played, I think he played 9 offensive snaps, maybe even less. Of course,
he only got 1 target.
Right. Because he played 9 snaps. Like, I understand that it's not great from a like the Jerry Donabedian's box score breakdown article, which we love to reference all the time. I just think it's Mike Williams getting worked into it. But more importantly, you saw the exact reason why you want Mike Williams from a fantasy perspective. He's a jump ball specialist for a quarterback that's really good at throwing that. And I think the Steelers need somebody besides George Pickens. So I don't know. I mean, I had to play Mike Williams in one league this week and got completely lucky that I got that 1 score.
Ooh, that was really lucky.
Yes, it was very, very lucky.
No, you know what? It was skilled because you were on him even more so. I think you might have stuck him in your top 5 last week. So
from the trade deadline.
It's you know what? All skilled, Joe. We're not going
to. No. I'm fine admitting when it's a scenario where it's luck like that. But I do think rest of season Mike Williams ends up playing more. And even if it's 3 catches for 40 yards, that's disappointing. But the touchdown upside is certainly there because what happens if George Pickens gets injured? I mean, and then the Steelers' offense is completely different, and you're already getting a guy that represents that same thing. So I like Mike Williams a lot more than MVS, who is our cover boy. I think that's a flash in the pan. Now, I don't know why a defense wouldn't recognize that MVS really all he can do is run deep, and that Derek Carr is really good at throwing those shot plays deep. The Falcons are a dumb team. They've been very clearly dumb for quite a while now. So I'm hoping that other teams figure it out. MVS is on my list, but I would rather priority add Estime, Gus Edwards, Mike Williams, and Elijah Moore. Browns were on bye last week. There's a volume perspective to Elijah Moore. I'd rather have all those guys than assume that the 3-target Marquez Valdes-Scantling is going to continually score touchdowns. Like, that's a worse version of Alec Pierce. And I bet you people who are still listening to this have Alec Pierce still on waiver somewhere because we're all annoyed with the Colts offense. So MVS is low. He needs to be mentioned, but it's not like he's a complete fill-in, a target hog. I think the Saints offense just overall is kind of defunct. That's where I'm leaning towards.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. So the picture cover boy was just a little bit of a tease there, but obviously, even though you rank Mike Williams higher, you would still rather have Ricky Pearsall on your team, right? There's no question.
Correct.
There. Yeah. Okay. Exactly. Just making that clear because you didn't make your rankings. We had a little bit of a caveat there, and Elijah Moore, he made my list as well, just not my top 5 list.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into the quarterbacks. And again, from a streaming perspective, there's a few options with 4 teams on bye. Before we do so, a word from our sponsor, Circa Sports. The end of season is getting closer. You can catch the big game poolside at Stadium Swim at Circa Resort and Casino in Las Vegas. You get the 6 temperature-controlled pools, a massive 143-foot screen, and a booming game sound. Of course, you have the view of the pyrotechnics and visual effects all throughout the game. You can grab the best seat in the sun with day beds, poolside boxes, cabanas, and more. Stadium Swim's big game viewing party is February 9th. Only at Circa Resort and Casino. Space is going fast. Reserve yours today at circalasvegas.com. Let's also take a word from our sponsors, Blue Wire. All right, we're back. And from a quarterback perspective, Cardinals, Kyler Murray, not Bryce Young, not Daniel Jones, and then Baker Mayfield on bye. So there's the streaming candidates, and Russell Wilson rightfully made your list among the top 5. I think he clearly is one of the better options out there.
Yeah, I tried to pick off if there was a standalone option worth discussing on his own. And if there is anyone, I mean, I know we've talked about him on the show before, but Russell Wilson, one, the fact that he's only 22% rostered, 2, he gets a new weapon, 3, he gets the Baltimore Ravens this week. I think you have to stream someone for Kyler Murray or Baker Mayfield and need a pickup option. Russell Wilson is the first one you're looking at. Technically, Trevor Lawrence is 45% under our threshold, and he's at Detroit, who tends to get into some shootouts. But we don't know where he's
if he's healthy.
Shoulder injury. Exactly. One thing that didn't make our show last week, because it kind of surfaced later in the week, was Mac Jones getting the start over Trevor Lawrence. We'll get to that in a sec. Obviously, Bo Nix is still in the conversation, 33% rostered. He's finding receivers. He lifts his fantasy value with his rushing, with his legs. So, that's another option probably behind Russell Wilson. And then kind of like, I make the line, the next tier of streamers. Drake May, 13% versus the Rams. Derek Carr, 17% versus Cleveland. Joe Flacco, 11% at the Jets. Jameis Winston, 8% at New Orleans. Not so much here. So there's not much there. If you have to pick from that group, I'm more encouraged about Drake May than anybody else, just because of theoretical upside. There's room to grow. There's room for him to turn into someone that, that could be someone that is a difference maker in fantasy towards the end of the year. And some of the early signs are there, but obviously you're looking at Russell Wilson and Bo Nix first there. Are we in agreement there?
Yeah, absolutely. Right along lockstep with you. Yep.
All right. So some quick hitters, 2 quarterback leagues, just in case, you're out there and are really diving there, or even our 14-team dynasty league. I lost Dak Prescott for this season, and my backup plan was Kirk Cousins, who still has a bye coming up. Right. So I'm going to have to find somebody that's going to start. And with 20-man rosters, everybody hoards all the quarterbacks, especially with the surprise move to Superflex here. Next year, another topic here. But anyway, 2 quarterback leagues, guys that I will specifically be looking at in that format I just described. Cooper Rush, he looked like garbage. There's really no way around that here, and made that game, as many of the late games,
I lost a matchup because I played Cooper Rush. He got -2 points, and I lost a fantasy matchup because of that. I'm still pissed.
And Trey Lance did come into the game. But it seemed like it was kind of for a designed run play to Trey Lance, and then Cooper Rush came back, right? So I don't really know if you want to mess around with that, but Trey Lance could go over Cooper Rush. I almost said Cooper Kupp. Jesus. Mac Jones started for Trevor Lawrence this weekend, shoulder injury. He was pretty terrible. I guess he did throw 1 touchdown, but he had more turnovers than touchdowns. Who knows if they keep Trevor Lawrence out another week, because they do have a week 12 bye coming up. So we could be looking at Mac Jones. I actually, in my crazy league, I picked up CJ Beathard, not expecting Mac Jones to come in and overtake that. Now I get to drop him. Got my easier cut here.
Real quick, Jake, there was word at least Saturday that Trevor Lawrence could be done for the season. Like, it was one of those things where Jacksonville, given their spot in the standings, already at right now, I think they're at the number 1 pick. They're that bad. That they could just consider benching Trevor Lawrence altogether with his injury concerns.
Does Doug Peterson get fired before Mike McCarthy, or does his injured quarterback give him a pass?
They both end up getting fired at the end of the year. That would be there's no reason for anyone to bring on anybody, I think, in those situations. So I think they both make it to the end of the year and then get fired the first day after the postseason starts.
Fair enough here. All right, more 2 quarterback stuff. Coach Antonio Pierce of the Raiders has been non-committal on Gardner Minshew. Obviously, I'm reading that in a headline voice because that's pretty much what our headline says. We don't know if he's going to retain the job. Looks like Desmond Ridder is next on that depth chart. Who knows? Probably going to be a not so great scenario here. And then, man, we got to talk about Daniel Jones. Obviously, the Giants are on a bye this week, so none of this is going to help you immediately. But if he can't do it against the Panthers, even if it is overseas, who can he actually do it against here? There's a scenario in which he gets injured the rest of the season, and then all of a sudden a bunch more of his contract becomes guaranteed. Obviously, the Giants don't want that, so it might be in their incentive to bench him for Drew Lock. But on the opposite side of that spectrum, if you put Drew Lock in and he's of course he's going to play better, then suddenly you start, maybe you win a game or 2 you don't want to, and you get a worse draft pick. So there's a catch-22 there, but I would just be looking out for Danny Dimes on bench alert there. And that's what I got for 2 quarterback leagues, unless I missed anyone here.
No, I think you're good with that. I would say, of these guys that were speculating on, the Desmond Ridders, the Trey Lances, I think Drew Lock is the one I like the most. We saw him last year beat the Eagles in Seattle. there's a bit of this is not a good comparison at all, but there's a bit of Brett Favre in him where he just doesn't care and he'll make a throw even if it gets picked off. Well, it's going to get picked off 5 or 6 times because he's not that good of a quarterback. But that offense of the Giants has skill guys, Malik Neighbors, Wan'Dale Robinson. Like, I like the offense. If Tyrone Tracy, keeps saying it every single week, gets more involved as a pass catcher, they have a good option. Like, and if it's Daniel Jones just not pulling the trigger, not reading things, Drew Lock is going to do that for better or for worse. So I like
Tracy's
him.
Rest of season ranking is such an interesting thing here. Like, where do we put him on a bad offense? Like, consistently gets 100 yards and a touchdown.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to probably make our waiver wire awards list at the end of the year. I mean, he's been fantastic, and I don't even think he was like maybe 2 or 3 among that list of running backs because I think everyone got injured that one week, and we weren't really that high in Tracy, but it's worked out certainly for people who are aggressive and getting him even despite the Giants' ineptitude on offense. So I'm good to move over to running back if you are.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
So go ahead.
Okay, I was going to say, we'll start things off with a quick public service announcement. Jaylen Warren, when I put this together last night, was at 51% on Yahoo leagues, just missing our threshold. But we need to talk about him anyway. He got 16 touches last week compared to 21 for Najee Harris. Najee Harris left the game with an ankle injury, but returned on the final game-winning drive there. So things have been trending that way a little bit with since Jaylen Warren got healthy. I think even if they keep a pretty even split of your power run versus your pass catching back, your distribution there, your touch distribution, Jaylen Warren is an interesting player and is probably one that should be rostered, even if he's RB5 in 12-team leagues. So I just wanted to throw that out there again.
Can I give you one more public service announcement? It was announced today that Isaiah Pacheco has been activated to practice for the Chiefs. That does not mean that Kareem Hunt is out or that they're benching him. It says that Pacheco now has 3 weeks in order to play. The reports on Saturday are that the Chiefs are eyeing Pacheco to return
late
at
November.
The end of November. Right. So that he's activated now actually leans directly towards the 3-week time frame and that it is November.
That would explain the Kareem Hunt trade offers I got today.
I was just going to say, there is probably a window to trade Kareem Hunt now to a team that really needs to start a running back. For example, last week I had Jacobs on bye and basically nobody else at running back. I would have gladly taken Kareem Hunt for 1 week, but do not give up significant assets for Kareem Hunt unless you desperately need to have a running back on your roster for the next 2 weeks, because he will get replaced. And I think 1-for-1 shifted out for Pacheco when that happens.
Someone offered me Kareem Hunt for CeeDee Lamb, and even though Cooper Rush is the quarterback, I'm like, dude, that's a get kicked out of the league trade offer.
Yes,
sending BS offers to anybody. Anyway, but yeah, Pacheco also is 91% rostered, so it's not like you can, put up 1 in 10 leagues, like somebody dropped him.
be reactive to Kareem Hunt if you can afford to be reactive. That's probably the way I'd go with this.
Exactly. And then, of course, number one, if you missed this at the start of the show, Audric Estime handled 14 of Denver's 17 rushing attempts, led the trio in snap share. Coach says he's going to get more work. Pretty decent, favorable matchup ahead here. So he's your top running back guy. Obviously, we also discussed Gus Edwards, put him back in our top 5. Those are your top 2. But if we need some extra ones, I'm looking to Minnesota, actually. And Aaron Jones, again, in-game ribs injury, sat out the rest of the game. But of course, he seems pretty optimistic he's going to play this weekend against Tennessee, who is like dead middle of the pack in terms of fantasy points allowed to opposing running backs. But if Aaron Jones doesn't play or he gets hurt again, it seems that Cam Akers is ahead of Tyson Chandler on the depth chart here. That's pretty much been established here. Like looking last week, Akers had 29% of the snaps, only 15% for Ty Chandler. And then in terms of rushing, Akers had 13 carries compared to 4 carries for Ty Chandler. And Akers even had a target in the passing game here. So Cam Akers, this Vikings offense is kind of regressing. We all kind of assumed that would happen. Yep. They were on the road, but they only put up 12 points against the Jaguars. So that's really kind of a bad sign. But if Aaron Jones is limited, or Aaron Jones, we know from the Packers, there always seems to be a 4-week stretch he misses during the year. It's become apparent that Cam Akers is RB2 now. I don't necessarily believe in the skill set of Cam Akers. He's someone that is made every single, is mentioned on half the waiver wire show since we started doing this, as he bounces around from team to team or ends up as the backup. But that would be the option to own in Minnesota. And if I had to pick a number 3 pickup after Estime and Edwards, it would probably be Akers, unless all of a sudden Aaron Jones tomorrow becomes a full participant in practice like nothing happened.
I think Akers still should be number 3 regardless. He's the backup running back tier above Blake Corum. Like he's now in the Trey Benson tier where at least they're getting work, but clearly if the starter were to be injured, Akers enters. Now, the difference between Trey Benson and Akers is Benson is good, Akers is not. We saw him as the starter for the Texans, was not very effective earlier this year. Even stints at the Vikings last year wasn't very good. So like that's the difference of the quality, but the position and the opportunity is why Akers should be number 3. After that, it gets real tricky, I feel like.
Well, this one's almost a little bit of a cheat code, but I feel like I have to mention Tajay Spears, who's 46% rostered, so just barely below our threshold here, but he's back from a multi-game absence. He had 10 touches in his return. The snap share was 53% Pollard, 47% Spears. So you're basically down to a 50-50. I think Spears is more of the bigger play guy that they want to try to find the edge with. I mean, Pollard 9 carries.
Real quick, 7. Somebody in the chat was asking, would you rather have Estime or Spears? And I thought it was Estime all the way. But I guess with the workload of Spears, what's your thoughts on that?
I would rather have Estime in standard and Spears in PPR. I guess
okay,
if that makes sense.
Distinction.
That's we draw the line there here because well, now technically Pollard had 4 targets and Spears had 3, but when I think of Spears, I think of those kind of end around style screens where he can make something happen in the open field. And a few of those are going to be drawn up every game because whether it's Will Levis, Mason Rudolph, whatever, they're not throwing the ball downfield like we would like to, even though Calvin Ridley has definitely been finding his over the last couple of weeks here. But yeah, not to get too far off track, Spears is only 46%, so it's not irrelevant to too many people anyway. Last week we mentioned these guys, but both Keaton Mitchell of the Ravens and Khalil Herbert of the Bengals are speculative ads as they get worked in. Neither of these guys, I think Keaton Mitchell was activated off IR, but inactive for the Monday night or for the Thursday night football game.
Right, yeah.
It was something along those lines. And Khalil Herbert might have actually been active for the Bengals.
He fumbled on his one touch. He fumbled on his one touch for the Bengals in his
start here. Chase Brown's season. Chase Brown's season, ladies and gentlemen, just like we called all along. But some spec ads there. You mentioned that Tank Bigsby is dealing with an ankle injury, and we had to start ETN in one of our leagues. Yeah, but if you really want to get an extra piece of that Jaguars backfield, Dearness Johnson is next up. I don't really want to touch that, but if we're talking a league where we're hoping to get 2 points out of our running back, go for it. Also, we're pretty close to being due for a Marshawn Lloyd activation in Green Bay.
It sounds like it will happen this week for what it's worth.
Exactly. So that's a spec ad too. Now, even as Packer fans, we can't really give you a super good window on what a Marshawn Lloyd activation looks like. Does he take Emmanuel Wilson's role?
Does he take Chris Brooks? Chris Brooks has been the backup really behind Jacobs for the past 2 weeks.
Wilson has been involved in the past game a little bit, but it's hard to tell. I still see Jacobs dominating the touches there. I really do. I don't agree. Think there's a change of pace, but only when Jacobs is exhausted from toting the ball 8 times in a single drive. Jacobs is still your guy there, but Marshawn Lloyd has some theoretical playmaking ability. And I just wanted to mention because we didn't really know what was going to happen. Last week we actually mentioned Isaac Guerendo as a possible ad, but McCaffrey's window opened. McCaffrey played, and McCaffrey had 90% of the snaps, whereas guys like Jordan Mason and Isaac Guerendo, you can probably cut Guerendo, and if you don't have McCaffrey, you can probably cut Mason too. So, throw those out.
That's a tough one. I would feel really uncomfortable just releasing Mason, but you're right. The way that
trade him to the McCaffrey owner for a junk player that you might need. There's just no use in him right now.
Yeah, you're right, and I hope that the Niners play this safe, where they don't give McCaffrey this incredible workload throughout the whole season, given all the injuries.
Doesn't look like it. Does not look like it. I want to say it's 90% of snaps here.
I think you're right. I think that the two of them, Guerendo and Mason,
89% of snaps here. They only ran the ball 15 times. He got 13 of those carries, and McCaffrey got 7 targets, which is second on the team. So I think maybe they waited this long for a reason, and he's really, really, really good to go. So that's something I guess we'll wait and see on here, but. Otherwise, there's those guys. If you can get one of our top, 2 or 3 ads, like I'd probably cut either of those guys for Gus Edwards or Estime.
I sure would for Estime. Gus Edwards comes a little trickier. Guerendo for sure, but Mason for Gus Edwards is a little bit different. But yeah, I think Estime at this point clearly kind of is defined.
10 touches, 1 touch. 40% of snaps, 5% of snaps.
Good offense,
Just saying.
Broncos offense. That's the only difference there. But you're right.
Yeah, I can give you that one for sure.
All right,
we'll at least put a couple tallies on the board here.
Let's get to the receivers. Before we do so, let's get a word from our sponsor. Really, I mean, DK pick 6, but also Nick Whalen, our guy, helping breaking it down for us.
We're proud to be brought to you by DraftKings Pick 6. So many NFL offerings each week over at Pick 6. Been enjoying playing on the Pick 6 platform each and every week of the NFL season. Think a certain quarterback will throw for more than 300 yards. How about your favorite receiver scoring a touchdown? Check out Pick 6, the newest way to play fantasy football and win cash right now with DraftKings. Here's how it works. Just pick 2 to 6 players of the same sport and choose if they'll have more or less of a given stat. Yards, catches, touchdowns, etc. Lock in those picks and compete against opponents for a shot at huge cash prizes. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use our code ROTOPICK. That's ROTOPICK. Again, ROTOPICK, ROTOPICK. If you're a new Pick 6 customer, play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits guaranteed. Just use that code, ROTOPICK. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-78-89-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
All right, we're back and talking to receivers. Again, we've had a pretty bountiful list of guys. Our cover boy for this week is Marquez Valdes-Scantling, given his 3 receptions, 2 touchdowns for the Saints in their surprise win over the Falcons. A pretty good schedule from a opposition perspective. Browns defense, which has been pretty hit or miss, not very good relative to the talent this week. Saints then on bye, and then Rams after the bye. Reminder, Chris Olave on injury reserve. He is not eligible to return until week 15. And that point in the season, Saints might just choose to keep the guy that's gotten 3 concussions in a year out for the year, and Rashid Shaheed also out for the year. Bub Means, who was a waiver wire pickup at one point, also on injury reserve. So there is the idea that MVS is like last man standing, but also if he's really last man standing, why is he only getting 3 targets? Like there probably could be more work other than just a Rashid Shaheed lookalike.
Yeah. So that's the tough part here. And really, honestly, when he came to the Saints, Mason Tipton led them in snap share, but his snap share was 56%. He was second to Valdes-Scantling, who in routes run rate, Valdes-Scantling at 64%, 60% for Mason, but Tipton did not get a single target. So what the heck do we make of that? I'm not interested in Tipton. I'm not interested in Kevin Austin, who had 2 targets and 48% of the snaps. If anything, Juwan Johnson and Foster Moreau, maybe. I mean, Elvin Kamara,
Taysom Hill as well.
Yeah, Taysom Hill. Yeah, that's right. He doesn't fit into this chart, does he?
He had an 88-yard touchdown call back and a pretty bogus holding penalty to start the game too, but yes.
Yeah, and Kamara, of course, had 6 targets. So, yeah, this offense is going to be dink and dunk and then take a shot to MVS, which is going to be very frustrating to deal with here. But, again, that's just the situation we're going. And even though he's our cover boy, we still both rank Ricky Pearsall higher. In theory, I would rather have Ricky Pearsall at 37% rostered than I did. Now, granted, Juwan Jennings led the Niners in snap share at 90%, followed by Debo 79% and Pearsall 62%. Juwan Jennings had 11 targets, 6 and 6 for Debo and Pearsall. There's room for a wide receiver 3 in this offense, I think, and Pearsall showed us what he could do with the score. So, out of all these receivers, we got to mention that. We'll revisit Mike Williams, who is now up to 18% rostered with the Steelers. Only a 12% snap share in his debut, but his only target was a go-ahead 32-yard touchdown. You like Elijah Moore, who's only 8% rostered. He's coming off a bye. I'm still, if Elijah Moore just had a different name and I looked at all the context, I would think, oh, maybe this is someone I might want to roster in fantasy. But just the Elijah Moore name, it feels like we've been down this road over and over and over again, right? And it feels like fool's gold, even when he goes out there and gets a dozen targets, even when he's part of the Jameis digging himself out of the hole that Jameis created. Even then, but yeah, Cedric Tillman is still, if someone drops Cedric Tillman, I would probably go ahead and snake him first here, but I think
somebody offered a 2nd-round pick in our Dynasty League for Cedric Tillman. I turned that down. I actually think I feel pretty good about Cedric Tillman in there. Now, to be clear, I'm not going to be in the Dynasty League. I'm not going to be in the Dynasty League next year, so I didn't want to make the decision for somebody else. But that's I'm pretty high in Cedric Tillman rest of season, where he's somebody I'd be going out and acquiring if I could.
Here's someone I just thought to add back. Obviously it's risky because it's a Panther, but Adam Thielen has been added back to the 50-man roster. He's been reinstated from IR. His practice window is, it's here. The 21-day evaluation window came to a close today. So he's only 23% rostered in Yahoo leagues. I've seen people holding on to him, which is a little crazy for me, holding on to a Panthers receiver here. But that's another name that could get in the mix. And I mean, more than the likes of, I put Jermaine Burton on here. Seems to slightly be pushing Yosevas for the number 3 role. No doubt Jermaine Burton is more gifted, but, you also run the risk of very surprise inactives there. And, I don't know. I don't know how his teammates feel about him just deciding to not show up, and then those social media videos of him just chilling there at the slot machine. Like I don't know what to make of that situation. But Jermaine Burton in the conversation again here. I remember I will never forget earlier in the season that one show I was so gung ho on him being the big sleeper here, and then you were like, but isn't he kind of a head case? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Oh, they'll figure it out. They did not figure it out, and they never have. They have not since then. It's not a thing. So, but anyway, Jermaine Burton gets on the radar, I guess. Adonai Mitchell is another one that's coming up. He had the best game of his
Colts,
career. Yeah, he had the best game of his career here. But I mean, you got Alec Pierce. Josh Downs is still.
The difference is that Michael Pittman was injured, and he's been dealing with that back thing that a couple of weeks ago, I'm not sure if you remember, we thought he was going on injured reserve. Then he plays and continues to play, and it's still the same issue. So if you're the Colts, and again, this is what we have to do. It's not so much a week 11 conversation, but you're even getting close to that week 12, week 13. Hey, Chris Olave, you've had a lot of concussions. What if you just don't play this year? Hey, Michael Pittman, this major back injury, we're 4 games out of the division. What if you just don't play? And in that scenario, it benefits the Colts because A.D. Mitchell was a second-round pick. There is draft capital invested in making him be a thing. And if it means pushing out Alec Pierce, I know also second-round pick, but disappointing in that regard, that's probably a win for the organization that desperately needs a win. So I don't mind the A.D. Mitchell call at all, actually.
Yeah, he made the list, but you certainly provided much better context than I was ready to. So I'm gonna take that, Joe. But because he was a name that came up early in the year, and he kind of had the drops, and then he started falling out. But maybe it's time the kid gets a shot here. And he's definitely, you're not going to see what you have in Adonai Mitchell with Anthony Richardson at quarterback. You might have a chance with Joe Flacco at quarterback. So
I would want my
catchable balls.
The Flacco Richardson thing is a different conversation. I almost wonder. I'm surprised that the Colts have not announced that Richardson's back as the quarterback again. They're out of the division. They're likely not going to make the playoffs. If any shot as a 6 or 7 seed is like chasing the Chargers or Broncos, they're not going to do that. So you should be trying to see what you have in Richardson. And I actually think if Richardson gets right, and then you also get A.D. Mitchell right, that suddenly becomes a really, really bleak spot to, oh, wow, the Colts have a lot going for them. They have this receiving core that once they're healthy, and if they just make the right calls in defense, there's a lot of like positive narrative stuff that you could do for it. But that requires Anthony Richardson actually looking like a league average or slightly worse quarterback. He is not at any point right now, it feels like. And A.D. Mitchell's got to be more consistent too. I'm going to give you one other receiver name, and this was a player that was available in 3 of my leagues, all of them 12-team leagues, but Rashad Bateman, who was dropped, I think, in a lot of places by me, mainly
after
because
the Deontay
Johnson trade. And to be clear, Deontay Johnson is still going to have a role. That Tylan Wallace touchdown that made Lamar Jackson's fantasy numbers look great. Tylan Wallace is not a thing. It's not going to be anything you need to be chasing. But Deontay Johnson, Rashad Bateman, and Zay Flowers can all see the field and can all make plays. But right now, Deontay Johnson has been really, really bad in the few snaps that he has been. And Bateman, for the most part, has been really successful. So I think if you're looking for a big play guy, the AFC North version of Alec Pierce, that's Rashad Bateman. And sometimes that's a start if you're desperate. 4 teams on bye, a lot of them bad, but you could
29% rostered. 29% rostered. So that's a good call. I like that, Joe.
Yeah, Rashad Bateman would be one of those. I would want Ricky Pearsall ahead of him. I think I want Bateman over MVS though. That's where I'm at. I guess
that's interesting.
Again, I'm traumatized as a Packer fan as to what MVS's potential looks like. The reality,
you know what? Maybe Bateman could sneak over him. Maybe I put MVS a little too high. We're kind of talking ourselves down on that.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And Alan putting this as the cover boy. Alan does a great job for all of our YouTube content. Both Alan and Mason have been fantastic all season long in this massive grind. Allen is thinking from his dynasty brain, where MVS is like the only guy available in his 57 sleeper league. So that's the difference of that and the Rashad Batemans of the world. So tight end, Jonnu Smith has been interesting. If you've needed a tight end, I've had to play Jonnu Smith a bunch. The Dolphins, I would love to see target Jonnu Smith less and target Jalen Waddle more. But if he just keeps catching passes with his face mask, Jalen Waddle, which cost me another fantasy league, that was really fun, then Jonnu Smith probably should be more of a factor offensively.
Yeah, his last 4 weeks, 7, 6, 6, and 4 targets on Monday night against the Rams. He's going up against the Raiders this week, who are 28th against opposing tight ends in half-point PPR formats. So why not Jonnu Smith? He's pretty much wide receiver on the team at this point.
Right.
2 is back. People forgot that. And people didn't forget that. But what I'm just saying is the offense
it's a reminder,
somewhat capable. Just a reminder that 2 is back physically for the Miami Dolphins here. So we got that going here. I threw Hunter Henry on the list at 46%. We'll keep talking about him until he goes over 50%. If you can get Mike Gesicki or Taysom Hill, those guys are still very much in play, especially Taysom Hill. We talked about a Valdez-Scantling last man standing situation. Taysom Hill last man standing. He benefits from that as well here. So other guys I put on the list, Dalton Kincaid is dealing with a knee issue, which could mean more reps for Dawson Knox. Dawson Knox is the ultimate tight end touchdown vulture. Josh Allen has always had good chemistry with him over the years. So that's there. And then, I don't know, I saw Theo Johnson's name from the Giants come up. He's on a bye this week.
So Sanders.
Exactly. So, so he's on a bye, but his last 2 weeks he had 3 of 6 targets for 51 and a touchdown, and 4 of 6 targets for 37 yards. That's there's value in very niche formats there of somebody like that.
Yeah, the prototypical deep waiver wire guys have been Noah Fant for the Seahawks. I don't really want Noah Fant. Jatavian Sanders and Theo Johnson. Theo Johnson for the Giants, Jatavian Sanders for the Panthers. Both on bye this week. Jatavian Sanders has been one of those that I've been keeping an eye on that I have in a bunch of places. There's Lucas Kroll for the Broncos, who keeps getting like 2 or 3 catches for 25 yards. I don't know a league format where that matters to you, but if you somehow have needed to get tight end 26 to start this week, I guess there's that for the Broncos. But you're right. I mean, this is kind of a barren one out there. Cade Otton was the guy, was the waiver wire pickup.
Yeah, he's going to be the award winner this year, I believe.
Running away with it at this point.
Yeah, I've seen Tanner Hudson come up too with the Bengals, like with Eric All going on IR. Obviously, we talked about Gesicki, but Tanner Hudson vultured some of the work that I was hoping to go to. I was like, oh, white guy, upper 80s numbers, that's got to be Gesicki, right? Nope, wrong. That was Tanner Hudson. So yeah, that's where we were at there. But he'll come up in a couple lists too for your tight end leagues and those kind of things.
A pretty hefty amount of streaming defensive options this week, though. That's at least one benefit for this.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of people dropped the Houston Texans. I almost did. I'm glad I didn't, because they ended up with 5 picks on Sunday Night Football against the Lions. But a lot of people dropped them thinking the Lions are one of the best teams in football. I can't start the Texans against them. So that led their ownership to get down to 46%. And now they're at Dallas this week, of course, on the road, but apparently a place where the visuals don't allow you to really play or
the battle for Texas.
The offense.
Yes.
Yeah, the battle for Texas. And you're getting some combination of Cooper Rush and or Trey Lance. Houston, even if you're in a league with sharp owners, Houston needs to be the first name that you pick up and you go grab. A lot of people dropped the Packers defense, and they are at the Bears this week. So again, it's another road team, but
does it matter to you that the Bears have fired offensive coordinator Shane Waldron?
I think it does, because it can't make them better. Incohesiveness can't make them better.
You don't think they can make him
plays now?
They're going to be worse because they got rid of him?
They'll be worse a week afterwards. They'll be better off long term.
The Bears
Waldron was calling the plays, right? It wasn't Eberflus?
Yeah. No,
so
Eberflus
who the heck steps up out of nowhere and calls the plays?
I think you could, Jake. That was the whole point. And I mean, that's why they lost the Chicago Bears leadership, was that Shane Waldron was so astronomically bad at his job. Not necessarily that you can, but I'm just saying, like, there are plenty of people within the organization that probably can call plays as effectively. Now, the offensive line is really bad. Sure. I hope, as a Packer fan, this looks like that Titans game earlier this year where they got 9 sacks.
Yep.
I'm just a little bit worried that there's always a dead cat bounce when you get rid of an unfavorable coach. It's not getting rid of Eberflus, which is what a lot of Bears fans, I'm sure, would have wanted. But Shane Waldron might actually be one of those addition by subtraction things.
Yeah. Do we know that Waldron was disliked by the team, though? Or was it just kind of he was the scapegoat for their bad play?
DJ Moore, in no uncertain terms, basically said Waldron sucks. And there was also a clip when Shane Waldron was the offensive coordinator for the Seahawks last year where people were asking Jackson Smith-Njigba, hey, Seahawks rookie, what is the Bears offense going to look like with Shane Waldron? He was basically like, is this live? Because I don't want to answer if this is live. That was what Jackson Smith-Njigba had said. And that seems to have played out now with the Bears here in the 10 games that he's been the coordinator.
Okay. But in any case, so maybe they get a bump from that, but the Packers also might get a bump from the return of Jair Alexander. The Packers are among, if not the league's leaders in turnovers early in the season, almost on a record-setting pace, at least a franchise record-setting pace in terms of turnovers. You get one of the better cornerbacks in the league back against the team, organization, whatever,
Evan Williams
in disarray. Yeah, Evan. Yeah, exactly. So all of these things could come up to help, because I know a lot of people, I was helping a friend out, and I told her, go ahead and drop the Packers defense and pick up the Eagles that are sitting there on the wire this week. Don't worry about dropping the Packers, and definitely don't cut anybody else on your team here and hold two defenses like some people like to do. So the Packers defense is definitely in play for a streamer. I also threw down the Miami defense. Again, they're 31% rostered. Not looking too crazy good or anything like that, but they are the home team against the Raiders. I think the over-under on that game is maybe around 44, and the Raiders have some some QB consistency issues here. So Miami Dolphins if you really need to here, but between the Texans and the Packers, I'm hoping you'll be able to find someone to fill your team out there.
I also have the Rams on there too, going against Drake May and the Patriots. That offensive line is not very good. I know the Bears struggled against the Patriots last week. I think the Rams, I don't know if you watched the Monday night game, Jake, but I thought that defense for the Rams looked different than what I was anticipating and certainly saw earlier this year. So that would be one of those two if you're really scraping the bottom of the barrel. It's like, would you rather start I think it was the Eagles against the Commanders on Thursday night or the Rams against the Patriots? I'm going the Rams in that scenario.
I might throw Eagles on a short week.
Okay.
I don't know. It's really a coin toss situation. That's one of those questions where, fantasy experts can weigh in on that, but nobody really knows the answer to that.
You're right. Yes. Yeah. And Jane Daniels and them have looked a bit in them, and the Commanders have looked more vulnerable, but I've still been overall very impressed, even against the Steelers, which I thought was going to be a very hard matchup. They've done enough offensively. No Brian Robinson in that one. I think the Commanders' offense is better than
I don't know.
Certainly we were anticipating.
Yeah, maybe teams are starting to figure out Jaden Daniels, though. I mean, 9 fantasy points. There's been a lot of upset managers this week. 9 fantasy points from your quarterback loses you that week's matchup.
Yeah, it does, and it did for a lot of folks out there. All right, that does it for us in the Week 11 edition of the RotoWire NFL podcast, of course, brought to you by our friends at Circa Sports. We'll be back in next week. Hopefully, more running backs that we can discuss a little bit more. It's been receiver heavy. Thankfully, Audric Estime has added a bit more value.
We got an embarrassment of riches at running back compared to the last 3 weeks here to have Estime, to have Gus Edwards, even to have a flyer like Cam Akers and some spec ads on here. It's been discussing the handcuff chart for the last 3 weeks here. So now we actually have some names without any injuries to report. So I think that's the best case scenario here. Maybe we can keep it going.
Yeah, you're right. Thanks everyone for listening, and best of luck to your fantasy lineups.